this idea that somehow past performance is going to lead to future success. And so what does Safety 2.0 do? Well, what it does is, number one, is acknowledges that just because you haven't had someone get hurt on your job site doesn't mean that you're safe. It acknowledges that every hazard, constraint, situation, and condition that most companies need to have their next fatality exists in their operations right now.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Blue Collar Creative Podcast, where we're on a mission to make blue collar aspirational. Joined today by Jason Kunz. He's a husband, father, and keynote speaker, and he focuses primarily on health and safety and just innovating in that space. And we're just excited to have you here, Jason.
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
So just for anybody who doesn't know you, could you just kind of give us a brief, like, who are you, what do you do, and how'd you get to where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it, man. I think you said husband, father. I think you said speaker, all the above. You know, my wife and I and our 20-month-old son, we live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, actually just south of the MSP airport. And been married for about 5 years. And, man, I spent about 13 years with a large manufacturing company. I've delivered talks for more than 20,000 people across 36 countries, had my work translated into about 9 languages. But at the end of the day, who am I, man? I'm just someone who cares about people and who wants to send people home better than they arrived at work each day. Because when we say things like send people home in the same condition, you know, that used to be good enough, but we're being called to a greater duty right now, and that's to send people home better. And so that's what I'm up to, just like you and the team are up to, Ryan. We're just doing the best we can to deliver on that, man.
That's awesome. So I know, like, that's kind of a newer thing in the industry, and it's kind of starting to catch on a couple places I've seen it. What does better look like? You know, when we say that, like, what are some of the ways that can actually play out? Yeah,
it's a great question. You know, I grew up, and we're all just, for the most part, a product of the people we grew up with to some extent. And, you know, I was grateful. I'm lucky to have my dad instill some principles into me, and one of them was he would always say this after we left every single room. He'd say, leave it what? You know, Ryan, you know what I'm going to say. Leave it better than you found it. Like, that's it, whatever that looks like. And so, for example, you know, I had some folks, I gave them a chance to mow my lawn last night. They showed up, and I gave them the rundown. They did everything right. Listened. They repeated back to me what I wanted them to do. And then I looked this morning because my wife and I had an event last night, and the lawn didn't look better than they found it. Like, it was like a mess, man. And I'm like, clearly they weren't instilled with some of those principles. But that said, I don't judge them for it. I get curious about why that is, right? What is it about certain people where we have different standards, and those standards determine the decisions we make each day, and then those decisions determine the outcomes in which we deliver. In my case, a 3 on a 10 scale when it comes to the quality of my landscaping and my lawn. But what does that look like in the work environment to send people home better than they came? You know, within EHS, within safety, we talk about physical risk. And we have, for the most part, for let's say 100 years. And we want to send people home physically, right, as well or better. So what does that mean? That means we drop a nugget for them, give or take, on what they can do to care for their physical health. How well they sleep, right? How they move their bodies, for example. And then what would be another thing? Sleep, diet, exercise, let's say, what they consume, right? Those 3 pillars. We give them a little nugget or insight on how they can deploy some of those outside of the workplace. When it comes to mental health, man, you know this. You've seen the data, especially in construction, but it's not only in construction. Suicide is the #1 killer in construction right now. That's absurd. It's one of the most hazardous industries on the planet, and yet more people are taking their own lives than equipment, and falls from height and things like that are taking lives. And so what does that look like? It's giving people the opportunity, right, and connecting them with the resources that they need to care for their mental health. But that's not enough. That's where I see most companies stop today. You've heard this before, Ryan, old adage, leadership intentions. People say things like, I would never ask my team to do something I wouldn't do. And then I'll ask them straight up in front of a group of 30 or 300, raise your hand if in the last 6 weeks you've called a mental health support line. And no one raises their hand from a managerial perspective. Really, so you're telling all your team members when they're having a bad day to call this 1-800 number that you've now partnered with, this company, but yet your managers aren't actually modeling the behavior It's never going to happen at the front line if it's not happening in the front office. And so not only is it connecting people with the resources, but it's modeling the behaviors in using those resources as leaders across the organization, whatever industry you represent. So those are just a few ways of how we can actually deliver on that promise.
Yeah. No, that's great. It really is modeling those things. There's a real stigma around mental health and, seeing a mental health professional or, get it and needing help. That's one of those things. It's like, oh, you should be able to take care of it within yourself. And it's like, sometimes we just need help. And so how do you think we destigmatize that in the industry, especially where it's kind of, it really has a stigma to it?
Yeah, how do we destigmatize something like raising your hand for help when you're struggling? Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's happening because we've been talking about it for a long time. Mm-hmm. And we expect quick fixes. You've probably heard this before, right? We live in a microwave society, but anything that's ever successful sustainably takes crockpot patience. That's like, yep. I want to destigmatize mental health today. It's like, well, great. We've been doing safety alongside and with people for 50, 60, 70 years, and we still, for the most part, have no idea what we're doing. Like, this is going to take time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going above all else to take intention and consistency. Yeah. Because if we're going to destigmatize something, just like if you're going to get healthy, you don't go to the gym for 10 hours, one day, one time a month. Right, you move your body for 10 to 15 minutes a day, 30 days a month. And that's how you transform your health and well-being. It's consistency that always beats intensity. And so we need to continue to consistently say the same thing that we've been saying. Raise your hand if you're struggling. Model ideal behaviors as a leader. You don't build trust by offering help. You build trust by asking for help. We need to keep saying the same thing we've been saying, and sometimes we need to say it in different ways for different audiences, but it's really, really clear. It's biblical, right? You don't forgive 7 times. You don't forgive 77 times. You forgive 7 times, 77 times. That's also how you destigmatize mental health. You don't say it 7 or 77 times. You say it 7 times, 77 times to 77 times 7 different people and different audiences. And eventually we start to destigmatize it. There's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic formula, Ryan. We just got to keep saying it.
So I know we jumped straight into that there just because my brain got going off something you said in your intro. But I really want to know, Jason, like how'd you get into the position you're in? What makes safety like personal to you? What makes it something that was so interesting to be a part of making change and like moving things forward in that realm?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at first I'll acknowledge that, we talk a lot about, people need to find their purpose. It's like you need to find your purpose. And first, it's one of the greatest lies that we tell young kids. By the time they enter college, 18, 19 years old, they have to understand their singular purpose for the rest of their life. And you have to therefore identify your major and then stick with that major and then go all in on that major and work in that particular craft or field for the next 60 years. It's one of the greatest lies we tell people, and it actually leads to some of the mental health crises that we're seeing today. We put so much downward pressure on kids to identify a singular life purpose where if they don't have it identified by the time they're 22 years old, they think they're a failure. It's like, well, why is that a lie? Well, it's one of the greatest lies we tell young people is because there's no such thing as a singular life purpose. Your life purpose should change throughout your life. I have a 20-month-old son. Right? When he was born, my purpose shifted like that instantaneously. Yeah. 6 years ago when my wife and I got married, my purpose shifted like that instantaneously. Right? When I stepped into keynote speaking after 13 years at 3M, right, in a variety of technical and leadership roles, my purpose shifted like that. Right? And so it's really important to understand, number one, I don't think we find our purpose. I don't think we have a singular purpose for our entirety of our lives. I think we discover our purpose, and the only way to discover it is through action and experimentation. And so luckily for me, right, I did a lot of things that, turns out weren't my purpose, like selling Cutco knives door to door. It's fun, right? Turns out it wasn't my purpose in life. Working at Home Depots in the summer when I was playing football at Bemidji State University so I could have some extra cash on the weekends to do what college kids did. Like, Great, learned a lot, wasn't my purpose. And then several of my first roles at 3M weren't my purpose. But then I started to uncover and discover some of these new views on safety. Safety 2.0, safety differently. Some of the thought leaders, Decker, Conklin, Hallnagel, Ron Gant. These people I have massive respect for now, who I'm grateful to say I have a relationship with. And the pieces started to come together. And I started looking at the lineage within my family. And my great-great-grandfather, who worked in the granite sheds in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And a granite shed is basically a pole barn where they would have young men saw and cut and drill and work on granite slabs for 8 to 12 hours a day without any windows and without any airflow in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And as you can imagine, every single one of them died of silicosis. Mm. And then I think about, my grandfather, and he was in the Navy, was in the subs, on the subs, and then he worked at a large utility company in the upper Midwest, right? Your listeners would know who this utility company is. And at 63 years of age, we had to say goodbye to him, and he died on the operating table of mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer. A combination of all of those things and the, I'll say, underlying factors related to those things that led to his death. And then I look at my dad, who grew up on the family farm in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, for about 20 years of his life, and now he can't have a conversation because he can't connect with people because he doesn't really have hearing to any significant means. And so I look at that, and I didn't know any of that until I just started taking action and experimenting with different aspects of what a professional career could look like. And before you know it, my grandma's sharing this story with me. My mom sharing that story with me. I see my dad struggling with noise-induced hearing loss, and it wasn't that I found my purpose, right? It was that I discovered and created it through action and experimentation. So that's how I've gotten into what I'm getting into right now and continue to get into. It's making sure that those great-grandfathers like I had and my grandfather and my dad, that we don't have people that unfortunately have family members that go through the same scenarios that I have and far too many others have as well. It's a great question, Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing about safety to keep in mind, and we do this when we do videos as well, is it becomes real. Safety is about people. And so it's so important to keep in mind that it's not just, we're following these rules or we're trying to, not lose time or stay profitable, whatever. It's about people and it's about people outside of work too, because there's so much more to it than just, hey, you stayed healthy all the way through a project. It's about wear and tear on people's bodies over a career. There's all these different elements to it. Like you said about your dad with the hearing loss, it's like that's not something that happened all at once. It happened over time. And it's like, what are those things we can put in place, those practices we can safeguard against that wear and tear over the course of a career? That's more than just thinking about job site safety, or it truly is about making people better, than how they came to work.
That's right. You nailed it, man. You nailed it, Ryan.
So for safety 2.0, you mentioned that. That's an interesting word. I've never heard it put that way. Like, what does that next iteration of safety culture look like from your perspective?
Yeah, and this is, it's really unfortunate how controversial this conversation is. One of my good friends, mentors, someone I've looked up to for a long time, he just got blown up on LinkedIn simply because he posted not his personal perspective or opinion on TRIR, total recordable incident rate, OSHA recordable rate, but some really credible research related to 3.2 trillion worker hours, and I think something like 17 or 19 years worth of company data in construction. That makes a pretty compelling, empirically evident point that TRIR is pretty statistically invalid to determine safety performance, to compare across business units or companies or industries. Yet, right, what we say is if we have a certain TRIR, we must be best in class, or we're better than industry average, or scariest, right, is because we have a good TRIR, whatever that means, that we're safe. But what we're realizing is almost how absurd that is in certain contexts. Because imagine this, Ryan. Imagine if you and the team wanted to understand how to have a healthy marriage. And so what you did is you set out and you interviewed 50 couples, and all you did is talk about divorce and why those couples ended up getting a divorce. So it's this idea that we can be effective in our marriage by only studying divorce. Right? It's this idea that we can somehow become physically healthy by understanding only what people have done to become unphysically healthy. Use whatever analogy you want to use.
Yeah.
It's this idea that the absence of bad things is somehow equivalent to the presence of good things, or it's this idea that past performance somehow leads to future success, which is a ridiculous concept. Ask Yahoo, ask Sears, ask Toys R Us, ask BlackBerry, ask MapQuest, ask fill in the blank. Ask them how effective that was for them. This idea that somehow past performance is going to lead to future success. And so what does Safety 2.0 do? Well, what it does is, number one, is acknowledges that just because you haven't had someone get hurt on your job site doesn't mean that you're safe. It acknowledges that every hazard, constraint, situation, and condition that most companies need to have their next fatality exists in their operations right now, as we speak, Ryan. And our job is to uncover that information, right, by connecting with the people who do the work, people at the sharp end of the stick, because they generally have more information than the people at the blunt end and the people in the front office. It's our job to extract that information, get it to the people who can make the decisions, and then execute on managing, mitigating, controlling those hazards, and then measuring safety in that way. It's not saying that we throw out everything that got us to this point. That's not at all what this kind of thought process is saying. It's saying what we need to do is couple old knowledge and bridge it to new knowledge, and look at what worked and bring that forward, but look at what isn't working, leave that behind, and couple it to new information, research, and evidence. And so that's what it is. Some people say safety isn't the absence of incidents, it's the presence of capacity. I think that's a little too theoretical. It's really acknowledging that what we need to do is build an environment of trust, learn from the people doing the work at the front end, and then understand that people support what they create. And when we give people a voice at the table, we're going to get more engagement and more support and more accountability, because they're actually going to believe in what it is that we're doing because they help create it. So that was a long-winded way of saying that Safety 2.0, I believe, is the best path forward, but we can't just throw out what got us to this point. We have to bring some of that forward as well.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the total recordables, kind of like that misconception that it may be misleading. It may be something that we're recording and tracking and holding up as a banner of honor, and it may be something that's kind of like a misnomer. And so I've seen you use the example of Deepwater Horizon as an example of how things were missed, and it was touted as like, hey, this is safe. We haven't had to record a lost time injury or incident in so long, and then something horrible happened. Could you just speak to how like those statistics that we're tracking why might they be a little misleading?
Yeah, I think so. Deepwater Horizon is a great example. It's one of many, but I think I'll call them metrics or statistics might be a little bit misleading, is because it's become a scoreboard. Like, it's become safety as a scoreboard. And so what do I mean by that? Any metric or measure that treats a paper cut like a fatality, we should pause and we should ask ourselves, is this actually a useful or meaningful metric? And is it, at the end of the day, actually serving and supporting our mission, which is sending people home better than they came? And I think anyone in their right mind, I would assume, I would imagine that if you treat a paper cut like a fatality, and that's how we measure safety, then anyone would say that's probably a flawed metric. And I use that term very intentionally. That's probably a flawed metric. And I think Deepwater is a great example. 7 years without a lost time incident. If you go 7 years without a lost time incident in any industry, you're either really, 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 really good, like painfully good, so good, exceptional, and or you're lucky, right? And or you got something fishy going on. Because, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I can't go a month at my house just doing basic odds and ends, maintenance duties, activities, lawn care, landscaping, without hurting myself. I broke my hand last year taking a tree down with my dad. And we weren't doing anything absurd or crazy or dangerous. It was two guys working for a couple hours in my backyard. And we had what would be a pretty significant lost time incident. You could call it a SIF, a serious incident.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that we can learn from every incident, every event, every weak signal, every strong signal. We can learn from those things. But when you have companies who obsess over making sure you don't have paper cuts and ankle sprains, then what we do is we miss an opportunity to pour our time, energy, resources into identifying, prioritizing, and managing the stuff that causes the greatest human and organizational suffering, what I call SIFs, serious incidents or fatalities. You could say it this way: wherever focus goes, our time and energy is going to flow. And so would you rather have 100 ankle sprains or one fatality? Anyone is going to say, I'd rather have 100 ankle sprains. So at that point, the question that we need to ask is, how much time and energy are we pouring into making sure we don't have ankle sprains versus how much time and energy are we pouring into making sure no one gets seriously hurt or killed on our job site? Because there's not a company in the world that has infinite resources, especially when it comes to safety. And so those are uncomfortable, somewhat controversial questions in certain circles that we have to be willing to ask if we're truly going to deliver for our people, especially on those serious incidents.
Yeah. And I've heard you say, paraphrasing, as long as you're doing hazardous activities, something bad will eventually happen. It's about, have you created the environment for that bad thing to happen, or have you done the opposite? And so, I think it's good to be mindful of that when looking at those statistics or metrics. Is, when you're dealing day to day with difficult and hazardous activities, eventually, people are not perfect. Something bad can definitely happen, and so it's hard to claim zero is the statistic. Nothing bad will ever happen. So it's how do we prevent the serious things from happening? I think that's kind of what you're saying from what I'm gathering.
Yeah, it's a great summary. It's a great synopsis, and zero is also a controversial concept and term. It doesn't have to be. If you have senior operational leaders who say zero is the goal, what a beautiful, beautiful baseline to begin from. Because that tells me they care, it tells me they want to do the right thing, and it tells me they don't want anybody hurt on their job site. And yet we get all squirrely when someone says zero. It's give me an operational leader who says they don't want anyone hurt on their job site ever, and they're willing to model the behaviors that it takes to actually deliver on that. And I got someone who I can maybe with a little bit of refinement and coaching can open up their minds to maybe some better ways of measuring success. But that's a person that, hey, I'll go to war with that person because they are doing exactly what we need them to do. We just might need to tweak or refine a little bit of how we actually do it in that way. Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful summary, I would say, Ryan. You nailed it, man.
Yeah. So from someone who's, come from a EHS professional, obviously you've done a bunch of other jobs, but what kind of, looking at the next generation and that safety 2.0 mentality, what kind of advice, I guess, or, just focus would you give for people like the next generation of EHS professionals coming up?
Yeah. Authenticity is a dying craft. Authenticity is a dying skill. Mm-hmm. Authenticity is a dying trait. I see it every day on LinkedIn now. It's post. I've never heard that person use that term. They don't really know what that language is. And when we speak in person, this isn't at all how they communicate and converse. And then I see all of these, I think they're called N dashes, I think is what they're called. And I'm clearly this person isn't writing this. I'm it's so evident. It's so evident. And so what would I say to, I'll say the next generation of EHS professionals? I would say this. I would say the destination isn't the goal. You could take a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest, Ryan. You could go, I saw Mount Everest. I saw the summit. And then you see all the people who spent 6 months to 6 years to some of them 16 years, right, figuring out what it takes and then actually doing what it takes to climb Mount Everest. Right, it's not about the destination, it's about the process and who you have to become in the process to eventually get to some destination, that whatever destination you're aiming at. Why do I say that, and what am I talking about? Like things like AI are beautiful. I use them every single day, dozens of times a day in different variations and versions, right? But what it does is people are cheating the process of having to go through the grueling aspect of who they have to become to write a LinkedIn post every day for 5 years, to write a bunch of LinkedIn articles and do the research that it takes to actually understand what's behind that research and the context of it. People having to go through the painstaking nature of, I did 300 interviews in about 3 years or so. Some of the people that you actually interviewed, Ken at UCOR, Clint Wolfley at UCOR, I interviewed some of these guys to understand the future of safety and health. 300 interviews over 3 years. You think AI is going to replace that? No chance. Right now, will I use AI to summarize that and look for key themes and ideas? Absolutely. But I went through, it was grueling, right? That's a lot of interviews. That's a lot of podcasts. You're doing it right now. You're becoming a different human, Ryan, right? By going through these processes of having these conversations. Technology can't replicate that. And so what would I say to the next generation? Right? I would say respect the people who got us to this point and the principles who got us to this point. Be willing to leave behind what worked until it no longer worked. Right? Do the hard work that's necessary from you to become who you need to be, and acknowledge that growth and comfort cannot coexist. So anytime it's uncomfortable, it means you're exactly where you need to be. And then what I would say to them is I would say, more than ever, the critical key people skills that we're not taught, trained on, or coached upon in EHS are going to be more important than ever. Back to what I started with, related to authenticity. Finding out who you are and what your unique voice is and how you can connect, build trust, show empathy, listen, understand. Right? These are the skills that are going to be more demanded and demanding from our workers than ever, because there is so much inauthenticity in the world. And so that's what I would say. Double down on those, what we used to call soft skills, what I call essential skills. Double down on those more than ever, and you will forever be employed, and you will forever bring value to the people you're asked to bring value to.
100%. I was having this conversation with someone this past week. It's just like it's easier than ever to be successful these days, because it's those essential skills, as you call them, that are what make people successful. You know, it's the relationships you build and how you build them, and then, you know, who you are authentically with integrity to people that make people successful. And so I think it's easier than ever because there's so many opportunities, and there's such a need for authenticity and for people to just be real and to be people of integrity, to be people who work hard. And I think, there's a lot of opportunity to be successful now that, you know, it may seem, a lot of people talk about it like it's, you know, the end of civilization or whatever, like things are getting really difficult and there's no opportunities. And I think there's a lot to be made for yourself if you can just be authentic and real.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things that any human being, I believe, will ever have to discover for themselves. What is authentic? What does authenticity mean to you? And what is you, aka, right? Who is the real you? I think it's the hardest, right? But arguably the most important work any of us will ever have to go through. And as you know, Ryan, you can't do that by reading a book. You can't do that by watching a podcast. You can maybe do it by hosting a podcast and having a lot of conversations. But you just really have to do the hard work, man. You got to sit down and journal. What do I believe? What are my principles? Right? Who am I? How do I want people to describe me in the room when I'm not in the room? And then the other question, which is probably even a more important question, is how do I want to describe other people when they're not in the room? You know, we see stuff on LinkedIn all the time, and I think it's kind of cool. You know, it's like some version of, there's a billboard, and it was obviously created with AI, and it says something like, you know, get people around you who have your back in rooms that you're not in. Like some version of that. And I'm like, that's cool, but it's actually kind of whack. Like, you want to reframe that, right? And you want to be the type of person who others want to get around because you have their back in rooms that they're not in. It's like you can take the selfish approach to life, and oftentimes we do it totally subconsciously. It's not intentional. Or you can take the selfless approach to life. But in order for you to understand who you are and who you're going to be as you walk through the few decades that we have on this planet, right, is you really have to give yourself the time and the space to do that. And it's harder than ever to do that because we are in such a distracted world. And AI only extrapolates that, as does social media. And therefore, to your point, I wouldn't necessarily say it's easier than ever to be successful. What I would say is, I'll just kind of compliment what you said, is I would say it may be as easy as ever to stand out because we're willing to step away from what society says successful is and define for ourselves what it means to be successful, independent of what the world tells us. And I think the few people who are willing to do that, I think they'll stand out. And then in their definition, right, they'll be successful based on how they deem success, not on what someone told them growing up.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a very accurate way to further explain what I was trying to say. You put it in better words than I could. So thanks for that.
That's pushing. I just expanded upon what you said. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's 100% accurate though. I wanted to jump back to you said you interviewed 300. You know, some of the same people that I've talked to, really awesome people. Those safety professionals in the industry, and you said it was around 300, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's more than 300, but I just say 300 because it's easy to remember and it's a big number. But yeah, it's more than 300. Yeah.
So what are some of the, because that's a huge undertaking, one of those things that not many people have done. There's, I'm sure, some incredible data that you learned from that. What are some of the key takeaways that you would say stood out from talking to that many safety professionals from different areas of practice?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I'll try to put it into 3 buckets and try to be concise because I've been rather verbose on this discussion so far, Ryan. So let me say the first one. Things are changing faster than they've ever changed before, and at the same time, things will never move slower and change at a slower rate than they are changing today. Meaning things are only going to get harder and things are only going to move at a quicker pace than they currently are today. And if you look at that, there's so much truth to that, right? The changing demographic of the workforce, the changing expectations of the changing demographic of the workforce, changing regulatory expectations, changing client and customer expectations, global uncertainty when it comes to the economy, when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to taxes, tariffs, fill in the blank. Things are changing faster than they've ever changed before. So what's my point there? Well, my speaking coach, Ryan, this is the point. This is what he says. He says the goal for any safety professional, and this is any professional on the planet, whatever your industry, the goal is to disrupt yourself before you have to disrupt yourself before the market or the competition or the technology does it for you. I like to say it this way. We have to make sure that our internal rate of change matches or exceeds the external rate of change. Otherwise, right, we become outdated, and that which becomes outdated eventually expires. Right? That's what happened to the big companies I referenced before that are no longer with us today. They failed to acknowledge the external rate of change and the external trends, and all they did is just focus down and in instead of up and out. You have to do both, down and in and up and out. And they missed the fact to disrupt themselves, and as a result, they got disrupted. So that's the first thing. It's EHS professionals acknowledging these trends and then doing the hard work to disrupt themselves and evolve faster than things are evolving externally. Second, undeniable, right? An obsession, a doubling down on, a commitment to preventing the most serious incidents and injuries. If I did, let's say, 330 interviews, let's say 328 of them said that we need to do a better job on preventing serious incidents or fatalities. Because we all know this, and we've all seen this, and it's unfortunate. We'll have a slip trip, right? Someone will sprain their ankle. Someone will be in the parking lot and step on a rock or a curb, and they get injured, and that sucks. That's a bummer. But you know what sucks even more is when we ask EHS professionals to write procedures related to walking safely across the parking lot. That sucks even more. And I have true stories from these interviews of EHS professionals being asked to write walking procedures, and they joked with me. They're like, what is it supposed to say? Left, right, left, right, left, right? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. You wrote the procedure. You tell me. Because, again, I want to double down on this. Every minute that we spend on preventing those minor slips in the parking lot, which we never want to have happen. We don't want to ever have those happen, but just acknowledge every minute and every dollar we put into preventing those is a minute and a dollar we're never going to get back to prevent the serious hazards coming to fruition and seriously injuring or killing someone or multiple people in our operations. So that's the second thing, doubling down on SIFs and then making sure we have proven strategies integrated into our operations to deliver on SIF prevention. And then the third thing is related to that. It's related to integration, right? Safety is the safety professional's role is such a broken ideology. Because for most companies, you get 1,000 employees and you have 1 to 3 safety professionals, give or take, let's say, just on average. Who's going to win that tug of war, Ryan? Who's going to win the tug of war? 1,000 people pulling in one direction or 1 to 3 EHS professionals pulling on the rope in the other direction? It's ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. And so what the goal is, right, it's not safety professionals as safety professionals. It's safety professionals as significant strategic influencers and integrators across the operation. What do I mean by that? If the big locomotive in the train yard is operations, which it always is, and you hook up as a safety, whatever a little small rail car train would be, and if you hook up to the big locomotive, that's when things are going to move. And our goal within safety is to make things move. And so what does that mean? That means we need to get really intimately interested and integrated into the business that is operations. Another way to say it, we ask operations to come play in the safety sandbox, where what we need to do is safety professionals go play in the operational sandbox. We need to get into their world, and at that point, right, once we earn their respect, trust, and credibility, now we can ask them to do some things like, for example, help us roll out an initiative so we can hook up to them to that big locomotive and things can move. So I would say EHS integrated in operations with operations leading the way. Those are 3 themes. The third one is something that we would have to go much, much, much deeper into to discuss how to actually do that. But I think just being aware of that and setting that as a goal, right, is important for EHS pros to understand now and moving forward.
Yeah. No, that's great. There's definitely, like I said, that's a really unique opportunity you had, and you really put the work in there. And I'm sure there's some incredible insights that help you daily. As we're kind of wrapping up here, Jason, like I'm just curious, like what throughout the rest of 2025, what are your goals? What's your plan for the rest of 2025? What are you shooting for?
What am I shooting for the rest of 2025? What are my plans? Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually something I think about every single day. And I don't know for you, Ryan, if you work with a coach. I don't know if your listeners work with a coach, but I think everyone on the planet should work with a coach, multiple coaches. And this was the exact conversation I had with mine. His name's Johan. Exact conversation I had with him last week. And I think what most people struggle with, myself included, is really understanding is if the plan that I have on paper is aligned with the purpose that I'm supposed to be living at this point in my life. And that's a struggle, big time, because I say that my priorities, and my wife and I are aligned on this. I say my priorities are faith, family, health, relationships. That's what my wife and I say on paper. But if I look at my calendar, my priorities are work, workout, travel, and then probably everything after that. And so I think for myself, but I think for everyone, is we need to really get clear on what's authentic and what's not, because we talked about authenticity. That's the definition of inauthenticity, saying one thing and doing another thing, right? Not aligning with our principles and beliefs. And once we don't align with our principles and beliefs, there can be no fulfillment, there can be no happiness, because you have that internal dissonance. And you know how that feels, I'm sure, Ryan, everybody does.
Yeah.
When what you do is not aligned with what you believe. And so I'll tell you what my plans are right now, based on what I think is the right thing to do. It's to continue to speak around safety, SIF prevention, building trust, delivering on engagement, right? Helping operational professionals lead safety, right? Partnering with their EHS professionals, speaking on that globally, ideally, but at the same time, spending as much time as I can at home, intentional time, right? With our 20-month-old son, with my wife, and then hopefully, right, having some fun and starting to practice and work for baby number 2, which will hopefully be coming in the next year or so, give or take 12 to 16 months if everything goes well, out of our hands. But that's what we're praying for, and that's what we're going to practice for. You need both from what I've read. And at the same time, I just believe, man, that what is that old thing from Confucius? A healthy man wants 1,000 things, and an unhealthy man wants but one. So it's making sure that I'm caring for my health, the health of my wife, and of course the health of our 20-month-old, and making sure that faith is integrated into everything that we do. And hey, man, if I can deliver on that in 2025, faith, family, health, relationships, right? And then in addition to that, really deliver in a big way for my clients and customers, and somehow move the needle on getting people to buy into and engage and believe in that we actually can send people home better than they came. I think that's a pretty good 2025 for the next 6 months, my man. What's on Ryan's plans for 2025? What's on your radar?
Honestly, listening to you say that, I resonate with a lot of that. It's, do what you say your priorities are reflect what's actually on your calendar? And you had me evaluating that while I was sitting here, and I would say the same thing. Is like I want to have those similar priorities. I would say those are my priorities: is faith, family, and then the community around me. Those are definitely my top priorities. And yeah, it ends up being a lot of work and a lot of putting out fires for things. And I'm with you. Like, I want to focus on those priorities, on the things that are actually important, the things that I say are important and I believe are important. So yeah, I'm going to have to do some thinking and journaling around that later. So thanks for that. Thanks for that little nudge. That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. My pleasure, man. Appreciate you being open and honest with me and with yourself on that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you again, Jason, for coming on. Where can people find more of your content, or look you up and learn more about you?
Yeah, so I got to just reference this. I will say this first. I'll just answer your question. LinkedIn is the best place to find me. If you want to connect, if you want to see my content, if you want to learn more about who I am and what I do, LinkedIn is the best place to do that. And I just want to reference this. I love someone I really look up to in a few ways is a guy named Laird Hamilton. He's the original big wave surfer. He created stand-up paddleboarding surfing. And when Tim Ferriss asked him that question, hey, Laird, where can people find you on the Tim Ferriss podcast like a decade ago? He said, you'll only find me in the Pacific Ocean. Which, hey, man, what a cool way, right, for someone to find you. Is talk about someone who's clear on their purpose and what they're supposed to be doing at that point in their life. So, yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. And maybe one day if my wife and I and our little guy move to the ocean, you can find me in the Pacific doing some surfing. But at this point, you just have to find me on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I definitely encourage anybody to check out your content. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, and I think you touched on it well earlier when you were talking about advice for EHS professionals. Is a lot of the content you share, like you're sharing these innovative kind of like safety 2.0, the next phase, and challenging some of the norms. And even though it's controversial, you said it well earlier when it's respect the past and the things that have come before you, gotten you to this point. And I think what gets lost a lot of times is that the people that are challenging the status quo oftentimes are still respecting how they got to where things are at in the industry. But it's like you said, disrupting yourself before you get disrupted, staying ahead of that. So I think you do that well. And it's just a good reminder that you're still respecting the past and where things came from, but you can still push the future.
Yeah, that's something. You nailed it, Ryan. I'll just say it how my pastor says it. Is he says this. He says, you can make a point without making an enemy, and then number 2, it's impossible to antagonize and influence at the same time. And so anytime before I put something out into the world, into the universe, right? Is I'm always asking myself those questions, right? Did I make a point here without having to offend someone or make an enemy? And then am I intending to influence here? And if I did, will anyone feel like they're being antagonized? And it's again that internal feeling. Like when something feels off, it's an energetic yes or an energetic no. That's not like woo-woo. Like that's very real. Like if you're a human being connected with yourself, you realize that. There's energetic yeses and energetic nos. And what you just referenced is spot on. Right? I think that's what I would leave people with is, if you're looking for what's next for you, right? If you're looking for identifying your current purpose at this point in your life, if you're looking at bringing more value to the people, the companies, the whoever it happens to be, your community, right? Is when you sense an energetic yes, then pursue that aggressively. And when you sense an energetic no, then pump the brakes and revisit maybe why that's an energetic no, and then you can recalibrate at that point. So Ryan, I'll hand it to you, man. It's your show. Why don't you close it out?
Yeah. Well, I just again want to thank you for joining, Jason. I just want to encourage people to check you out and follow you on LinkedIn, check out your site, and if you're looking for anybody to speak at an event, I'm sure it's insightful stuff. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me, man. Keep doing the good work you guys are doing. I loved that UCOR video that you did. It brought back old memories. So keep doing good things, man.